Hello and welcome to the two-man power trip of wrestling. Host JP John Poz. With me today, a very special guest. He's a writer, producer, former WWE head writer during the Attitude Era, Mr. Tommy Blacha. Tommy, welcome in. How you doing?
Good. How are you, man? Nice to be
Very
here.
good. Very good. What's going on in your world? What are you up to?
Nothing. Working on all kinds of stuff. Most things will die as in this business. Developing shows and cartoons and such. I always view it like it's like a maternity ward of a lot of babies, and then like, oh, it's dead. Get rid of it. So, but in doing voiceover stuff and what have you, going back and forth from Los Angeles to beautiful Lago Vista, Texas, north of Austin. So that's it.
Anything anything wrestling related that you're up to recently?
Just the podcast, Tales from the
Tales.
Attitude Era. Yeah. Which has been a lot of fun and actually kind of surreal because, when you're in that world, Rob Pasbani, this guy who's did a lot of metal podcasts and wrestling fan, he contacted me and said, let's look at all the old shows from the Attitude Era and talk about them. I'm like, okay. And then when I view them, it's like, oh God, it's just a flood of memories. Cause frankly, you don't really watch any of them when you're involved in it, especially, that era, like Monday, your weeks are so filled. So just all kinds of stuff comes back. So it's been a rejuvenation of my pro wrestling mind, for better or worse, whatever that entails.
They say sometimes doing podcasting is like therapeutic. You're going back and you're watching some of that stuff.
It's absolutely therapeutic. And then, you just the attitudes. And, the big thing that I always do is there's so many wrestling podcasts now. I try to take the mystique away from it. And, and I'm always kind of saying like, well, because people say, whose idea was that? Anything that succeeds is someone's idea. Anything that fails is someone else's idea. But I try to tell everyone it's a team sport. It really brings back how weird and interesting pro wrestling is and how unique it is. Cause it's like the same thing like an actor or something, but you have a line, but in another way, it's not like it. And even combat sports are individual, but wrestling is a team sport, really, in a lot of ways. But then again, it's so cutthroat and political that doesn't fly a lot either. And it's, like, what is it? And all these years later, in the 100-year history of the business, you look at it and like, yeah, what is it? I don't know. It's very unique. It's very changing, and it's an odd business, to say the least.
It is so
as
weird.
You well know, I'm sure.
Yeah, like if you actually think about it, it's so weird. It's like, okay, you have to trust the other guy, but also he's probably going to stab you in the back because he wants that paycheck and he wants that top spot. Like, it's such a weird business.
It is. And when you think of it, what it mimics, combat sports, that's really like, oh, two individuals, they're just going at it. But, obviously you're only as good as the guy selling for you, but yet there is that individualistic thing. So it's just a very strange tension, that's there. Very unique.
Were you always a wrestling fan though? Like before you got in, or no?
Yeah, certainly. In fact, my older brother is 10 years older than me. He was like a kind of a superstar athlete, and he knew a lot of people back in Detroit. And frankly, he used to sell a lot of like pharmaceuticals to guys in the 70s and such.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So I had I was like wizened up at a young age, because I saw some of the guys in, that there was like, that was the Sheik's territory, obviously, but we used to watch, I used to go up to Canada and play hockey and see Maple Leaf Wrestling and George Crybaby Cannon. And I think I got a picture of him right here. And, the Mongols.
Oh, nice.
All kinds. Yeah. So I was pretty wizened up as like a sixth grader. In fact, one time, wrestling's so odd. You kind of even know when you're young, sometimes when you see someone throw a punch, but yet they hit the canvas with their foot at the same time, you're like, that's not a proper way to throw a punch. And there's certain things, even though, the old timers, like, we're protecting the business and it's believable, like, yes and no, it's a very like odd dynamic. Cause even as a little kid, you're like, well, that's, that just, you can kind of sniff it out. But I remember once I went to, I was in sixth grade, and we got front row seats with my brother for like a local show. And it was like the Mighty Igor was there. He was a good local, and Bobo Brazil, and Bobo Brazil's brother. I can't remember. He was a heel. I can't remember his name now. But anyways, there was, I was kind of using some of the lingo back then, even, like, because I learned from guys and my brother. And then a couple of the guys there, they took an enhancement talent and just slapped the shit out of him, like right in front of me at the barrier, because it was in a high school and Detroit's East Side, and just chopped the shit out of this guy so bad. He was so welted, and they were like doing it right, obviously, like for me, because the whole fucker thinks he's wising up, hey.
Yeah,
and I walked home. I was in 6th grade, and I walked home. Just my head was so, I was like, it's fucking real. And then I was going to school the next day, like talking to, other people in 6th grade, like, oh, fuck you, wrestling's fan. I'm like, it's real. It really fucked with my head. It was so funny. So yeah, I've always been a wrestling fan. And then even later when I became, I got into punk rock, and I kind of like felt like, man, wrestling's a lot like punk rock, and especially in that era, it's a subculture. And it was kind of, now the big product is such a corporate darling. I don't want to say I'm against it, but I like that it was like a, you know what I mean? It was like an outlier and an outlaw thing, and that people looked down upon it. And that was a very punk rock ethos that I enjoyed. Even during the Attitude Era, it was a weird thing where, the numbers were so big, but the kind of apparatus and the corporate machine didn't like it at the same time. And there was a lot of all these politics, which I always enjoyed, that subversiveness of pro wrestling, and it was like punk rock, where even people would, who would always like say that's not real wrestling, even like when Kurt Angle got heat, even, in the 99 from amateur wrestlers, to be like, what are you doing with this fake shit, and what have you. So I always enjoyed, the aspect of going to shows and just telling people, yeah, I believe it. Or what's the greatest phrase? Someone told me, I think it was like Blackjack Lanza said, there was a phrase in wrestling, which was, for those that need an explanation, none will do. For those that don't need an explanation, none is necessary. And it kind of speaks to people that kind of like, they might ultimately, pressed like, yeah, I know it's a work, but they don't care, and even when you talk about the Memphis territory or all those kind of rabid fans, you're like, do they really believe it? And it's like, it doesn't matter. It's, what I mean? If you need an explanation, none will do. So so I've always been a fan, certainly.
And all the injuries. I mean, you know what I mean? The guys legitimately get really hurt. So I always used to throw that out there. These guys are really getting hurt out there. I mean, come on.
Oh, without a doubt. And just that's the big thing too, is the road, you know what I mean? You're on the road in a band, and that's hellish, just on your back, just traveling, let alone being a wrestler. I remember once, God, a few years ago, I saw the Undertaker in the airport, just the way he was walking. It was again like, oh, hey, go say, oh, it's just his back. You could just see, holy shit, that guy's back's fucking hurting. It's a mess. So yeah. And besides all the grievous injuries and what have you, because I remember going to when I worked for Conan O'Brien show, went to an early Cauliflower Alley club, probably like 96 or something, and just seeing some of the old timers like bent sideways, and just like, whoa, what the fuck's that about? You know what I mean? Look at those knuckles and what have you. So for people like, certainly, yeah, especially that like any sports where it's like, tape it up, keep going. That's the big deal.
What were you doing with Conan? Were you doing behind the scenes stuff, and Richter was interviewing all the wrestlers?
Yeah, we did a great thing. In fact, that's how I got into actually WWF at the time. But so I was a writer producer at Conan, and even then it was kind of like, so you even remember like 96, 97, people would be like, yeah, pro wrestling. They would, a lot of like intellectuals would be like, that's not real. Like, oh, really? Thanks, pal. But so I would actually cast wrestlers in things, and I'd always pitch wrestlers to be like, man, if you have a third guest, it's some lame sitcom actor that no one knows. Get wrestlers on there. I'd say like, they're visually interesting, they're smarter than you think, they're more charismatic, they do so much live TV, you know what I mean? And so I remember cast the Big Show in a thing as a babysitter in a skit, and quite a few guys, and it was always like promoting having him on, and we had Goldust on. But yeah, this bit was like during the election. So it was like, let's go to the Cauliflower Alley Club and ask wrestlers about like who they're voting for. And we had like pictures of like it was Dole versus Clinton. So, but yeah, it was super interesting. Met Killer Kowalski and Jimmy Snuka and Lou Albano, and it was classic. It was at the Jetport Holiday Inn in New Jersey. It's just like, and it couldn't have been like better. But yeah, it was incredible. So
yeah, I remember the Andy Richter always had like I don't know, just a funny reaction either from the wrestlers or himself. He was like shocked some of the answers. It was always good TV.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, we used to go to some things. Well, I was college roommates with him, and I dragged him to a couple things in Chicago. Chicago was great because we'd have they were kind of battling because they would have WWF at the Rosemont Horizon, but they would have NWA at the UIC Pavilion in downtown Chicago. And I think they were kind of fighting. So we'd be like, oh, you saw a lot of shows, but I would drag him to some. In fact, we were just a few rows back in the famous curtain call match at Madison Square Garden. So he was a fan and went to a few things. Of course, he wasn't that huge of a fan. I had him on my podcast and was like, I was like, you remember that? That was actually a huge historical, card that night with the curtain call. And he's like, oh, I didn't know. I don't remember.
What kind of fan is he?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, wrestling needs even the outlier fans. Well, I put it this way. He's a great fan for a celebrity and actor, what he does, I would say. But yeah, he didn't keep up with the curtain call aspect of it. But, like everyone, I'm sure you do the same thing I run into in entertainment. They feel necessary to tell you like, yeah, I don't follow that. Although when I did like the Ultimate Warrior when I was a kid. They have their era.
Yes.
Most people, I think, have their pocket that they grow out of. I would say that would be most people, but everyone's has some opinion.
Definitely. And it's crazy that day, right? That the curtain call happened in May of '96. Everyone beforehand, no one could have cared less that Michaels was fighting Diesel. The whole thing was that Warrior was returning to the Garden after all those years. It was all about the Warrior. I remember, because I'm from Jersey, I remember the whole like newspaper clipping. It was like the Warrior's return. There was no mention of like anybody else in the card. But then when that card's over, all about the curtain call. It was like that kind of stole the show after the fact.
Although there was that pocket of, I include myself in this. I've always rooted for heels, so I was like smart asses who liked heels were there for other reasons. So like, in fact, when I was a kid, I would always go to Cobo in Detroit and like root for the Russians and get some real heat from people. It was fucking crazy. Just Jesse Ventura. I remember just seeing some like fantastic things, in getting down there and rooting for heels. In fact, Jesse Ventura did one of the greatest things ever. God, I probably was like in junior high or something, and we were sitting in the front row because you could go down to Cobo, and sometimes we'd even sneak in. But so we were down there in the like front row, and Jesse, I think I can't remember who he was even going against, but he'd go to the ref. That's an open hand slap, and I'd be like, and me and my friends were like, yeah, it's an open hand slap. And then just like a house show, the matches can go so long. Jesse would stop the match really slowly, bring the referee over to us, and be like, ask them, and be like, open hand slap, and the ref would be like, get away from me. He did it about 5 times. It was unbelievable. So he'd punch the classic headlock knuckles and be like, hey, fist. And he's like, no, hold on, come with me. walk over so slow. People were booing, and he'd be like, right there, ask them. And we're like, open hand slap, and the ref would like, I don't care what they say. And just that was like an early thing of like, oh God, they're doing this on the fly. The ref's in on it, but they're, you know what I mean? It's like like acting, and it's so it's like you'd call it in writing a script or a TV show a set piece. It was like, oh, look at this thing they're doing, and they're milking it, and everyone's booing, and they can't stand it, and people near us were like, shut up, keep going with the match. But I just was like, I fell in love. I was like, that was just so funny, and that was like Jesse at his finest, and also classically like highly entertaining. And as he would say, like, I didn't even take a bump.
Yeah, exactly. And he's doing a little bit improv out there, which is awesome.
Yeah, good for him. Yeah.
I love those old school heroes. Plus, a lot of the times when you're wasting time, so the crowd thinks, or so you're taking a powder and all that other stuff, they hate it. That's just like instant heat. Where they're like, come on, wrestle. What are you doing? Why are you wasting time?
Yeah, I remember one who was the greatest, Zabisco. God, I remember
Yes,
seeing him live.
yes.
It was like, man, this is like 11 minutes in it. They haven't even locked up. he's rolling out. He's rolling out there. He's just taking his jacket off and like, well, hold on, I don't have my jacket. It was just like, and just heat build up. It was like, oh, it was great. Yeah, I
Arn
love.
Anderson.
Oh yeah,
Well, those Arn used to call Zabisco the cigar store Indian. Like he just stands there and just wastes time and just wastes time. There's nothing going on. He's a
yeah.
mannequin out there. He was saying he's just gonna stand there.
Yeah, I love it. I love that old house show stuff. Sometimes, even the era I worked in, it was like one of the most impressive things I always thought about the boys were like these matches are like, okay, here's the show, especially the Attitude Era. Like, just comes left, this, boom, bam, the other thing. You got 5 minutes. Okay, wait, we've readjusted. You got 4 minutes later. Someone's promo went long in the middle of the match. IFP, referee, go home. It's 3 minutes. Like, fuck, but he's got to win. Just the shit they have to do on the fly.
Yep.
And it really affects the matches, and it's really hard. And a lot of times you'd be like, I'm so impressed that you pulled that off with those constraints, where sometimes you love to go to see a house show where shit can spread, and you don't see that. And in fact, God, one of the last house shows I saw in LA, Jericho did the greatest thing that couldn't have been done on TV, which was like, it was some 6-man tag. I can't remember who else was in it, but someone threw a big toilet paper roll into the ring, and Jericho stopped the match and picked it up. And he was, kind of a senior guy. That he stopped the whole thing and he called for a mic. They brought a mic up and he just had this toilet paper roll and he goes, all right, who threw this? Who threw this? Just like he's like, we're not continuing till we find out who threw it. And then you could see he's opening his back up and he's like, oh, he's feeding them. And like finally, like one of the other guys like caught it and drop kicked him, and he went through the rope and then threw the toilet paper roll into the air. And it was just like, oh, that was just done. And then people with me were like, was that planned? And I'm like, oh no, this is, that was like stuff like that.
On the fly. Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, it's precious.
I always liked house shows better than like TV tapings and stuff. I just thought, it's like the longer matches, they're having more fun. Mm-hmm. You can kind of just do whatever. I always just like house shows more.
Definitely, yeah. For the most part, it's sometimes some of those good shows that I worked on were just such ramped up craziness that were. But as far as like, yeah, if you had to pick, I definitely think house shows are great. But, at the same time, they probably aren't for everyone. Probably the era I worked in kind of grooved a lot of people who weren't like super wrestling fans or into the minutia of it or, the nuance. Maybe it grooved them better. So that's has its value, so to speak. But I'm with you. Yeah, for the most part, I like a nice long house show.
Yes. I love going to the Attitude Era, all the TV tapings in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. I mean, we went everywhere for it, but we went to a house show in Philly once, and it was awesome because Stone Cold is just like kind of just joking around. I mean, they had a match, but he's just joking around afterwards. He stuns Shane like 12 times in a row. The crowd goes nuts. You could totally tell it's improv because he's drinking beer, and then he says to Shane to get back in there, and he teases Shane that like, oh yeah, I'm going to give you a beer. He's like, thank you. Like, oh, I appreciate it. Then he goes, of course, drinks the beer, and then another stunner. It was just like, It just kept going. If that was the TV, obviously it would be over stunner and that's it. But it was so funny because the crowd was going one more. So it's like 8 stunners, and he gets another beer, and it's like 9 stunners. It was great.
Amazing. Yeah. Absolutely. I've seen come do that a couple times. One of them, he did, I can't remember when the show was. At some point, he stunned Triple H. The TV, show taping ended, and he did that exact same thing and it was the same. It was, and then it just turned into, you couldn't do it because it turned into just pure humor. So Triple H, and he was even getting to the point. Triple H was like, "Okay, I've got one leg through the rope," and like, "Okay, hold on," it becomes like vaudeville or something. And he's like, and he's like, you want to have a beer? You're not, and all the pantomime. You're not going to stun me, are you? No. And then the same thing. And then they had to run out more, we always had a lot of beers, but it's like, oh, more beers. And he went through like 30, 40 beers, and he was getting drunk because he's pouring. And then he was on top of Triple H, like yelling at him. And then like, and the house show, the house lights were on. and everyone's like wrapping up the cables, dismantling the thing because they got to go to the next city. And then and we're back like there for the post-mortem meeting, and it's like they're still out there. It was like 40 minutes, and it was like,
wow.
And the whole I mean the upper rafters were filled, and it was just but it was just what you explained, and it probably was about eight to 10 stuns, and Triple H like, God damn it. It was like, okay, he's all the way through now. Hold on. Just like again and again. And then I remember them coming backstage and they're just cracking up. And you can see Austin's like, oh God, I'm exhausted. I'm cracking up. And even though I'm just pouring beers and like probably drank 8 of them, because he poured 40 of them in his head.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So funny. So amazing.
Me and my buddy, we were first row for WrestleMania 15, but we always, which is funny because this house show was before WrestleMania 15. To get the tickets, to get to WrestleMania 15, we always talk about that house show even more than WrestleMania 15 because it was just so much fun. We're like, remember how ridiculous? And Shane just gets up again and takes another stunner, and this time he like flies 10 feet in the air. It was crazy. It's like, wow, we talk about that more than the actual WrestleMania, which is nuts.
Dude, I'm completely with you. I just talked about the Jesse Ventura thing. In fact, I remember a house show. God, I always remember this. Boy, this was probably 1980. It was Bret Hart, pre-Pink, Cobo Arena, early match against Jim Neidhart before they were a team or anything.
Nice.
Bret was wearing the red, and they had a match, and then he got the microphone at the end of the match, and in his total like Canadian accent, we were all making fun of. He's like, and Neidhart was leaving, the ring because it was a draw, time elapsed draw. Bell rings, okay, and then Neidhart's walking out of the ring, and Hart gets on the microphone like, "Hey, these people here, they really paid to see like a finish, So what do you say we put like 5 more minutes on the clock and like find out who's gonna win this thing?" And then Pepper like, "Oh, of course." And then Neidhart like looks around and like, "Okay," and then he's like, "Well," and the refs. Oh, I guess we should. I don't know. Can we? Ding, ding, ding. Oh, ring the bell. It's heating up. So he's there, ready. Fucking Neidhart slides in. They just run the ropes back and forth, not seeing each other. I mean, like fucking 12 times. And it just kept going, and people were like building, and we were like, what the fuck's happening there? Was one going to clothesline? Is one going to say? And then Neidhart just slides out and goes, "Fuck yeah!" and then leaves, and nice. Like no finish. And it was the oddest thing. And like to your point, like I still remember that. I'd love to like talk to Brett about it. I've never seen anyone do that before. It was so fucking funny and odd to see them.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like 2 solid minutes of running the ropes. It was just crazy. So
I love it. And there was a house show that I went to. God, this has to be over 30 years ago. Yeah, definitely, it's over 30 years ago. Iron Mike Sharp versus Hercules was the match. For some reason, we were in like the second row, but my dad's friend, he was one of those guys, kind of like you, where he's like getting into it. It doesn't matter if it's heel or face. You could tell. I don't know. Maybe he might have had maybe a couple beers, but he was getting like super into it. Him and Mike Sharp started getting into it, like yelling at each other and cursing at each other. We're like, what? And, he's saying fruit and this and that, like just go back and forth. I was like, what? I'm 7, 8, or I think I'm 7 years old. So I was like, what is going on? And he's just going back and forth with Iron Mike Sharp. I'm like, wow, what what is this? But of course, then it's like, wow, Iron Mike Sharp is like the meanest guy I've ever seen. Why is he, yelling at my dad's friend? And why is my dad's friend yelling back? Oh, it was great. But I still remember that. I'm like, wow, Hercules versus Iron Mike Sharp. Jeez.
Sure, loved it, man. Nothing beats those guys, especially Iron Mike Sharp. That's a guy that's like, wow, is he a work? I don't know. Does he know? You know what I mean? It's like that, or like just just the lines get blurred as to like these guys become these characters, and especially him. He's like that. They're not around anymore. That classic, like I guess you'd call him certainly talent enhancement. Yet he had his own gimmick, and he was he got his shit in, and he was himself, and he was just like a or someone like the Missing Link. That was always a super intriguing guy. Both Canadians, by the way.
Yes.
But like that guy was always like just jacked and in great shape and just odd as fuck, and had a ever living, a gimmick that lasted for decades, the same thing, and just had that like, oh, don't want to mess with him, and
Yep.
Yeah, love those
Definitely.
guys.
Yeah, those throwback classic guys are awesome. And I know a few guys that aren't Mike Sharp trained, and they basically have the same opinion of him, saying like, yeah, he kind of wasn't really a gimmick, he's kind of really being himself.
Yeah. No, it's
Like a
funny.
nut.
I remember, a lot of those guys too. You meet them. God, I remember, working a little bit with Bob Backlund, and it's like, oh man, Bob Backlund is, he's an articulate man when it comes to like college sports and pro and amateur wrestling, but like he's really he's really out there too. You know what I mean? And then just like, and just a machine of physical fitness, and like, just like, it's almost becomes like, aha, that's his gimmick, but the real guy is so close to the gimmick, and the real guy is actually more intriguing because it makes you scratch your head more. Like, wow, that guy's something,
And then if you
Iron
meet
Sheik,
him,
of course, being the greatest of all time.
yes,
Blurred line became the gimmick, or however you want to put it, and what he grew into. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, if you met Backlund for like an autograph signing, I remember he was like, "Who was the fifth president of the United States?" And like you had to give him the answer. I'm not gonna sign it. Like weird stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. This like all American guy that's like, then he I think he legit ran for something, mayor of a town or Congress or something at one
Something
point
in Connecticut. Yeah.
And then it was like, the line is blurred. The gimmick line is gone. Maybe we should come up with a thing that's like, what happens? It's a condition that certain wrestlers get where the gimmick line disappears.
Yeah, didn't he literally? Because I remember I was at a show during the Attitude Era in New Jersey, and he was like literally in the crowd signing autographs, like during the actual show. So it's like, is he supposed to be there? Is he not supposed to? I know him and Vince had a weird relationship, but it was like, wow, was he even supposed to be here today?
Yeah, we did a couple things with him, and then he was around, and so that era was so chock full of everything, and everything was like, yeah, we're ready to do anything and everything at any time, and this could come up and this could go away. So, and sometimes you'd be part of things, and even sometimes you'd be presented things like, oh, Backlund's going to be here, but so we did have some plans and some things with him. I can't remember, but they didn't go too far because they kind of, for whatever reason, just kind of fizzled. But yeah, he was but I remember meeting with him and stuff, and it was always a blast, and he'd always just want to, hey, I can still go up and down, do a step test on a chair for an hour. I could go a straight hour. That's not that easy. And I'm like, fuck yeah, sure it isn't.
Definitely not. Yeah. Oh my God.
At the time, and he's like, oh, I could, he was like, I'll show you. Like he was ready to, like, in his suit, like, you want me to do it now for an hour? No, that's okay. I believe you. Like he was just like, and he was legendary for that too, just like,
yeah, an awesome shape.
Yeah. Step up and down on a chair he would say, like, that's the greatest thing. Get up in the morning, no matter what. Just get yourself a chair, step up and down it 500 times. Start your day 500 times.
Be back to sleep. Start my day. I'll be back to bed. Crazy.
Yeah. And you see him in the later age too. You're just like, oh, he's trim, but it's like, oh, he'll stretch the fuck out of you.
Yes.
At age 80 or whatever, like that.
Big time. So how did you actually get in? I know we're talking about Conan and kind of getting your way through wrestling because you're with Andy Richter doing those Cauliflower Alley Club stuff. So how do you actually get in WWF as one of the writers?
Well, it's really odd. I kind of boobed into it in a good way. So I'm working at Conan, and I'm gonna leave, and I'm gonna move to Los Angeles and pursue some other things. So at that time, we had Gold Dust on, and Shane had stopped by, the offices and stuff, because it was like, oh, here's kind of like anywhere that's like, oh, this show's friendly to have wrestlers on. And even, like I said, in that era, 97, 98, wrestling has gone in and out, and Hogan was on shows and what have you, but for the most part, it wasn't like, as what's the word, public, mainstream, legitimate, friendly as it is today, because everywhere's starved to have any kind of celebrity on then. So then it wouldn't be like, you don't want to have too many wrestlers on. It still was looked down upon in ways. And so they were like, oh, it's a friendly show for wrestlers. And I said like, oh, you should have, Vince on as a guest. It's Conan. And he's like, yeah, I'll do that. And, you can produce the segment, and I was like leaving in like a week and a week or two after that. So had Vince on and, met with him, and it was kind of funny. And cause I just really, and you got to remember, even at that time, using the lingo a little wasn't like now every smart mark in the world, everyone doesn't mean a thing, but we're talking 98, 99, I'm kind of like, oh, this guy's over. You should do this. And he's like, oh, is that right? I was like, not fucking with him, but just being like cavalier about the segment and like, in just talking to him about, Vince Law, he's talking to a, guy on the show about wrestling and talked to him about old house shows and shit and my brother and stuff and the Fabulous Kangaroos and how he used to have a gym in Detroit, just shit like that, doing the pre-production. And I found him like super engaging and everything and like, oh, that's great. And, hey, thanks, and fuck, how lucky I boobed into it because when one of the other segment producers there, Frank Line, said like, oh, this guy knows everything about wrestling. And I was just like, and I would kind of tell him, hey, you should do this. You should do this. This is good. Just so I go home and quite literally like 2 days later, I get a phone call and my girlfriend at the time was like, oh, it's Vince McMahon. And I'm like, what? And it was just so crazy to hear him on the phone and like, oh, yeah, I heard you're leaving that show. Like, what? Yeah, you want to come down for a meeting? And I'm like, oh, fuck yeah, So
yeah.
Like, that's weird. He just called me. So I went to Stamford for a meeting, and I kind of even at the meeting said like I had plans to move to LA, and I kind of said, you know what? It's almost, I don't want to waste your time. I came here because I wanted to see your office, and hell yeah, I was going to get a meeting with you, but here's. I've got plans to move to the, West Coast, but, so I almost was kind of like I said, like, I'm almost caught embarrassed because I'm like, of course I had to say yes to just come in here, and see your office and everything. And then he said, why don't you come down to a couple shows? We'll pay you $1,000 a night, like just consulting fee. And, just see how it goes, just, one show at a time. I'm like, okay. Meanwhile, I guess part of it was I boobed into it by being like coy. I didn't mean to be. I wasn't being smart or Machiavellian. I was just like saying shit. And then, so I remember going to like Louisville or somewhere. And then what's odd is oh, this was great. So this was 99. They owned like a travel agency. So I got cut an airline ticket right in the office. So I got like a check and an airline ticket, like right in the office, printed up, like given to me. And and I went up, and I'm like, oh, so I didn't know. I'm like, whoa, God, that's sexy. You leave with your fucking check and your airline ticket. Like,
yeah.
It was crazy. So I went down, and it's odd to go to a show then, because people are like, who's this guy? Even going in, as you go to any arena, they have a thing like catering's this way, kayfabe rooms this way, training, this, that, Vince's office, and then, take over some room in some arena, some in Louisville or somewhere. And then like just traveled with him and Shane and Stephanie and just like, oh, go into the office. So people see you and they're like, who's that guy going in Vince's office? That's weird. And then like, is that someone Stephanie's dating? Is that a cousin? Who the fuck is this guy? And then even Russo, and as they do, like he didn't know like who's there. And I'm at the production meeting and stuff. And Russo, then I get introduced to Russo, and then was like talking, and then like we just shot the shit about like, oh yeah, you work at Conan. Oh, you're the Conan guy, whatever. And then we talked about Kiss and fucking TV and shit. And I didn't realize that he probably was like either put off or just kind of like put him in a weird position maybe. And I'm just like this boob, like, oh, I'm coming down. And then suddenly I'm like helping to produce like an interview, like, oh, giving one-liners or doing whatever, which is the odd thing about wrestling. It's almost like it's catch can TV production, to borrow a phrase, like, oh, what's going on? And then after, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And I remember talking about like, yeah, I like, Draws and Prince Albert and this and, that and the other thing. And then you're to the next city, went to next city and, did it and met everyone. Russo, hey, this was great. went home, and then like, hey, we're gonna see you next week, and I'm like, yeah, I can come next week because my plans weren't for like a few weeks, and I can't remember. Did it again next week, and then like about the third week, I had gone down to Stamford, and actually met with Russo in his office and stuff to help come up with shit. Cause I'm like, oh, I'm kind of like I guess, freelance consultant here, getting paid kind of these day rates, and like, oh, I'm just going out and Ferrari, like, kind of like pitching stuff and whatever, helping out. But, it was odd because like, I thought like, oh, I'm going to be leaving soon. So I didn't have any pressure or if I like, oh, I got to fit in, or I'm just like flying by the seat of my pants, whatever. And then Russo says, so I actually the next week of shows were in Madison Square Garden it was actually in the Brendan Byrne at the time, I think it was the Jersey Arena, and then SmackDown was Tuesday, was in Nassau Coliseum in Long Island. And so I went to the one, or I called Russo, or I was telling him like, yeah, I'm not going to come next week. I might stop by that show and just say bye to everyone, because I'm going to move to LA. That's my plans, and it's been great, and this is awesome, and whatever, and always be a fan, and maybe kind of thinking like, oh, future stuff, work on, I'll be in TV, this, that, the other, whatever, shit like that. And he's like, no, just go to the shows, go to the shows again, go to TV next week. And I was like, well, I don't know, it's in maybe, I don't know, maybe I'll stop by, maybe not. And he's like, just go to TV, just do it one more week, do the East Coast week. He was actually like talking me into it. I'm like, all right. And then I went there, and he was gone, and him and Ferrara and Bill Bentley, I think was his name, was
Bill Banks.
Vince said, like, Bill Banks, thank you, said, yeah, that fucker at TBS took the whole creative staff. They're gone. We're left without a show. Subsequently, I talked to Russo. He said he did have a show written, but whatever. This was what was, presented to me. And it's like, what are we going to do? And he's like, hey, man, I need you, man. And then what was weird, and it's very Machiavellian of Vince, and back then you just write the shows on a yellow pad of paper. So start booking the show. And as usual, obviously, because of the situation, everything I said, Vince was like, that's great. Like ultimately you would think like, yeah, when there's more stuff that he could shoot shit down. But since like, he just was like a thing. And then he's like, oh, present it in the production meeting. So here I'm like, fuck, I didn't even want to come to this show. I was going to leave. And now I'm like in the production meeting, like kind of running out. Oh, we're going to do this. We're going to do that. Kind of mimicking how Vince ran him the last 3 weeks I saw. And a lot of people are in there like, who the fuck is this guy? You know what I mean? Right. And because it was all like, where's Russo? What's Russo's gone? This guy, it was just this weird scuttlebutt that people had talked about, but didn't have time to, because there was a show. And then it was like, wow, that's crazy. And then I called my girlfriend at the time and said like, well, I'm going, to the next show. I remember in Nassau. And I'm like, I think I'm going to be hanging around for a bit. I don't know. I didn't even think about it. Like, oh, I had plans to leave and everything in a few weeks. And then the next show was the tragic Draws accident in Long Island. That was like the second show. And then by the end, then he was like, everyone was like fucked up. And it was like the second from last match, I remember. And then we had to meet, and he's like, we got to think about how to edit the show, because it was SmackDown to tape. And just came up with some ideas like, oh, we could go here, do this, some rudimentary editing thing. And then I remember driving back and pre GPS or whatever, got lost in my car, and I was like on Staten Island. Went, oh fuck! Got back like 4 a.m, and I'm like, holy fuck! I felt like I've been in wrestling a month these last 2 days. And then I just kind of was like, fuck! I didn't end the lease on my apartment. I just switched stuff. I just started working. And quite frankly, I didn't even get paid for like a few months, because they're like, oh, we'll work it out, And because I was just like, because it was so intense. There was like fucking, Monday night, one pay-per-view a month, and you're just fucking going. And then, Gewurz came on and all these people. So it was like, just fly by the seat of your pants, crazy. And then there was a time, there was probably like 2 months, 2 or 3 months. And I'm like, fuck, I got to get paid, and yeah. I kind of knew that I would be like, well, they're going to make it good. But then my friends would tease me like, yeah, you're working for a wrestling promoter. Yeah. And you fucking don't have a contract. What's yes. Yeah, of course it's Vince McMahon. And I'm like, Jesus, this is where so all my dumb ignorant, boobing into this worked out tremendously for me. But here's where I fucked up: is there was a point where like, hey, we need to talk some money, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna get my agent involved. They didn't fucking know back then. They didn't know wrestling. My agent didn't want me to work for wrestling, and I said like, okay, fuck it, I am. And then so I was like, and Shane literally has a piece of paper. He goes, write down a number on a piece of paper, and I'm like, okay, well, I know I make this. I'm gonna pump that up a bit. So I wrote down a number, like a year's salary, and he's like, done. And I'm like, fuck, why didn't I fucking make it twice? And I'm like, and I was joking, like, oh, no, my pen, there's another zero at the end. I was like, motherfucker, I could have maybe written, but it was fine. And it was wonderful pay. And so it just, that was the start of it. And just like, people were just like, what are you doing now? And then just living in Manhattan still and flying 3-4 cities a week. And just, that was it.
Do they tell you like you're the head writer, or there's no positions technically?
Dude, back then we didn't even know, you wouldn't even call someone a stage manager. You know what I mean? We didn't even have fucking laptops. We were like scribbling on yellow pads of paper. This is no joke. We'd have Sunday Night Heat so Monday would be Raw, Tuesday would be SmackDown, but we'd have Sunday Night Heat before it. And so you had to figure, but then it would air on Sunday and you'd figure out that matches, they would just change the apron. And by whoever was left over after that production meeting, Michael Hayes and I used to write Sunday Night Heat in 5 minutes.
Wow.
We just, production meeting's over. He's like, Sunday Night Heat. And we like, okay, Funaki and the APA can do this. And all right, we'll do this. And just, it was a blast. So I think some people I had been introduced to people as creative director, and then like, was that right? And I don't know. I guess there's another guy in creative services, man. Oh, call him head writer, and then really nothing. It doesn't, you know what I mean? Which really what I loved about wrestling that's a little different now is like titles, and you're in Hollywood and everyone's I'm a this that, and really what's your title, and are you above this guy? I don't know, and all that kind of stuff. Senior digital marketing producer, and this, that, and the other thing, but. Yeah, no one had like titles. There was agents, Back then it was even still Vince would be like, dialogue. We don't do dialogue. It's verbiage. This might be some comedy. We don't do comedy. Something can be humorous, but it's not comedy. There was still those distinctions.
Yes,
that kind of stuff.
A lot of Vince's
besides his
like that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Besides his. Vinceisms, and some that were just from the business too. I think, I think those actually were beyond Vince, and also his just strange picadillos that you wouldn't know that were beginning, like, don't say strap. What? Don't even say belt. That was starting, because then sometimes I'd be like, but it wasn't really laid out there in a decree, which was weird. It was like, I just knew, like, because a couple times I told people like, don't say strap or belt in your promo. Like, what? Like, Vince doesn't like it. And like, but there wasn't a straight decree. Later, I think there became, some kind of standard operating procedure, out there. This was just word of mouth shit. And I always found it really odd. I still do. They're not a wrestler. They're a superstar. Oh, is it a superstar ring? No, it's a wrestling ring. Okay. What's going on? Yeah, those odd things. But,
yeah, those weird Vince like idiosyncrasies or whatever the hell they were.
Yeah.
Like he's got to be certain things certain way.
Yeah, and just part of it was like, that's passe. That's wrestling. We'd say like, I don't like okay, but belt. It is a belt. No, it's a championship. So yeah, some of that thing. It's sometimes. I wouldn't like it even in the later product when you'd see some clunky promos because especially if it's someone like Rusev or someone who had a little broken English. I don't want to put him into it, or someone who had to say, when we come with the WW chant, it's like, oh God, they got to say fucking 20 fucking syllables, superstar, and and the championship and all this. And it's like, he could have just said, I want that belt. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it would have been simple. You know what I mean? You see,
yep.
Yeah. Oh, they're getting tongue tied saying this stuff that has to match. some idiosyncratic vision or whatever.
So, like, obviously, you're the quote unquote head writer. You're basically in charge. Russo and Ferrara are gone. Is that a lot of
Mm-hmm.
pressure on you because they kind of put you in that spot? And there's some quarter hours that have 10 million people watching it. WWE is hotter than ever. I mean, the Attitude Era is just kicking ass and taking names. WCW is kind of slowly and surely losing. A lot of pressure thrown at you, or did you not even think about it?
Well, I tell you, there's a lot of pressure, but it isn't like what you put out there. Like, oh my God, I never thought of this whole thing. The pressure was just pulling the fucking shows off, period. You know what I mean?
Wow.
And
Yep.
especially you have to remember SmackDown wasn't that new or wasn't that old yet. That had just been added. So even there was, and even that Russo and them were still adjusting to like, and I think there's a lot of like, holy fuck, now they're just adding this other show. So, and then you have one pay-per-view a month, which is Sunday. So you have those like Sunday, Monday, Tuesday weeks where you're going from a pay-per-view, then you're going to Raw, and then another city, and then you're going to SmackDown, another city. So it wasn't the pressure of like, my God, this whole thing. It was just like, there's not enough hours in the day and you're just scrambling. But I got to a point where you're just like, all you can do is put your best foot forward. And then you always feel the pressure, but it's not like that. Everyone's counting on you. It's not like a vacuum moment. Like, this is the pass I got to make. I'm a quarterback. It was just like the fucking machine was huge. And at the same time, I always try to tell people like on my podcast, there's a machine I plugged into. There was a machine the roster was incredible. And when you go from a pay-per-view, you kind of follow some logic when you meet, okay, what happened and how do we incorporate that into this or that? So it's more, and I was good at, from being at Conan, which was a show, the similarities were 4 or 5 nights a week. It was like those blank cards, just how about this? How about that? No, how about this? How about this? It was just like, just going and going and going and going and having that energy and that pace to just continually do it is kind of what like alleviated that pressure. So it's very much like that. It's not like sitting and like, gotta come up with stuff. And like I said on my podcast, when I watch these old shows, like, oh, fuck, most of the shit is like, that just came out of nowhere. I wasn't even there for that because I was doing this. And you got to remember, you have agents and wrestlers coming up with stuff. I think today it seems like they would say there's a more pressure on the writing because things seem a little more contrived and there's more verbiage and what have you, where then, you'd hand stuff off and people would like change it, or, you know what I mean? Or everyone would come up with stuff, or like the old school stuff was like the wrestler, it was up to him or her to get themselves over. So they had to learn their shit and their character and their promos. So a lot of even doing promos, a lot of my stuff was even like watchdogging TV production or come in with like dynamic things like, oh, maybe we shoot this here or this or that would happen, or here's a good line or cut this shorter, a lot of stuff like that continuously. And then you just put in your best fucking work day as best as you can and take the heat, at things. And, that's what was great. There was, when Vince would yell at you, you take the heat. It's like, oh, that's right. Something else is coming up in 3 seconds. It was just, you got to enjoy that pressure. So, you know what I mean? You, when you work on a sitcom or some shit, there's more pressure when you're at a blank page and like, oh, fuck, are they going to like this? Or, you know what I mean? There's those vacuums of time where you're like, oh, I got to present this in a pitch meeting. And, but the era I was at, it was just like, go, go, go. You're talking about shit in a rental car on the way to here and, and working it out in the next city and landing and what have you. So there's almost kind of no time to feel pressure, if you will, and of that caliber. And also, like I said, just how I came in, I was so lucky in a way to just present myself where I wasn't like, I've got to climb this ladder. I'm into wrestling and I'm going to get there. It just kind of like, I kind of came in from left field in a weird way. So I kind of like, oh, what's the worst that can happen? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. It's so interesting because like Russo is there, him and Ferrara, as they turn the ship around and WWF got so hot, then they're gone. Then Vince is like, okay, Tommy, you're going to be the new writer. You know what I mean? You just get thrust right into it, and just keep going. Yeah. Austin is hot, Rock is hot. Just keep going.
Absolutely. And I'll say this in it's funny because I know people say Russo gets a lot of hate all the time. People tell me things, but I would say, I never really got a position like his. I never really even went for one or felt like I was like he was previous, where he was kind of a guy that was like running shit. When he left in the vacuum, I think Vince is like, oh, I'm going to reassert my shit and whatever. So I just looked at it like, okay, I'm part of this machine and I'm just contributing. And my job is to help everyone at every level of the roster get over as best as possible in every way, TV production wise too, and where I think he got handcuffed too, because I think when he went like, oh, he's because it's kind of false. Because even people, when I left, and then people would later say like, oh, you should go back. The ratings were great when you were there. It was the top. It's like, it's not because of one person. It's like a football coach. You get more blame and when it's bad, and
Yep.
and more praise when it works. And it's kind of bullshit. And so, when Russo went to WCW, it's like, it is the kind of like analogy, like a football coach. I always felt like, how the fuck is he going to just go in and fucking change everything like that? It's like a football coach gets a little grace period. Can't come in like, here's the new scheme, everybody. And like, well, what about the team? And you know what I mean? All these things, he didn't get that luxury. You know what I mean? It's because it's just TV. And then also when the PG-13 shit came, it was kind of like, oh, you got to take that away, even though you're there because you're supposedly the master of salacious shit, so there's all that. And that's why the writing was on the wall for me too. Like, well, before I felt pressure and in that weird kind of vacuum, that's when I kind of fed like, oh, you know what? I'm going to leave the business after, a year and a half or so, just because I felt like, oh, you got to be in this business 100% or not. There's no like, well, maybe I could pitch a side show and do some of the other aspirations or not. It's like, nope. I don't think there's reasons there's third generation fucking wrestlers, because that's such an all-encompassing business, so to speak. So yeah, it was very interesting. So I was like, would watch kind of WCW stuff and kind of feel like, as people, it was so hot then, and people were like, we're on this side, they're on that side. But I always felt for him going like, I was like, oh, he's fucked. He's got to, I mean, maybe shouldn't be that extreme with it, but it's like, he's got to, put this huge, crazy product out and just land there and meet everyone and just hit the ground running. And it's fucking, it's fucking wrestling. And, they're kind of, the momentum of them were like this, and a lot of reasons, basically like a football team. Like I tell people too, it's the fucking roster. You know what I mean? You can be Vince Lombardi and like, I got the shittiest players in the league. You can do some magic, but that's a huge part of it. And then even for the era I was there, it's like when people would, say shit like that, was like, well, holy fuck, there's The Rock in Austin, Triple H, and you got the upcoming fucking just had, the roster was like, it was like, oh, it's like I have the Pittsburgh Steelers 1974 fucking roster, or whatever. So yeah, it's a huge part of it. It's a machine.
Yeah, definitely. So you left basically why they were still hot though, right? I mean, they were still kind of killing it at that point.
Yep, they certainly were. And it was just I felt like there was more writers coming in. It kind of, I saw the writing on the wall of kind of like the tail wagging the dog, so to speak. They had gone public, and it was and I don't even want to put it in a bad way, really, because I think sometimes you come to things in life where you're like, 51% of me wants to really see, like, I don't know where this is going, and maybe I want to still pursue some of the things I wanted to do in TV and entertainment and performing outside of it. But 49% of me wants to just stay here forever because it's great and I could see this being my life. So I actually don't want to paint it like it's bad, so I left. You make those decisions in life where like, well, fuck, it's tipped in this way. But there is a big part of me that said like, that felt like, because Vince said, you got a home here as long as you want, and like, fuck, I really was like, maybe I'll just do this forever. You know what I mean? But you got to be 100%, I think. or at least that's the way I looked at it, because the business, the travel, just the essence of it, So
Was he pissed when you left?
no, he was like, no, he said, you got a home here as long as you want, and he kind of gave me that thing. In fact, Mick Foley said, like, you're one of the only people to ever leave on good terms. Like, maybe one of the only ones I've ever seen, So
because obviously Russo didn't leave on good terms.
Yeah, and that was all. Even to this day, that's kind of like mysterious, in terms of like, and I don't even doesn't really matter, but it's like, ooh, sometimes I think, when did he negotiate? How did he know when he was gone? When did I see him that first time? Did he know? Obviously, you don't just in one day go like, hey, come to WCW. So,
right.
Yep. You know what I mean? Who else? You know what I mean? It's just like, I wonder. And I think part of it with Vince too was also like, I came out of left field and was his kind of guy, so to speak, that he got from the Conan show or legitimate. So when I left, it wasn't quite like, a betrayal of a wrestling thing. And also Vince is smart enough to know someone who's like, I don't know, they're not all fucked up or hurt or it's not emotional on the way out. He'd be like, well, then I'll make it a good thing. You know what I mean? Instead
right.
Of,
right. No need.
Yeah, exactly. What does it service me to do that? I was always was disappointed by that documentary that they didn't like talk to Russo and people. That seemed to be like a pretty much a fluff job that then turned, because of the controversy, we better market it like it's a tell-all thing, but it really wasn't. That's what I felt. And then even by the end, go all the way to episode 5, and then the episode 5 just in dark letters, it's still being investigated. Like, well, it's no, didn't have anything really. So, but that's marketing.
Yes. Now, what was like the craziest thing you did during the Attitude Era? Obviously, Attitude Era, craziness. Everyone always, a lot of times associates Russo with like some of the craziness. But what's like the craziest thing maybe you pitched, or the craziest thing that ended up airing?
Well, the biggest thing is sometimes I would just like often, I'd pitch like crazy shit. Because I would even like say like, oh, it's like in comedy writers' rooms. You go too far, and then someone can pull it back.
Yeah, reel you back in.
Yeah, so it was like and we're looking for everything in everything. So one of the successful things was obviously Mae Young and Mark Henry. And, Mark Henry's like sexual chocolate. He likes to let's get him involved in things with the hose and stuff. And then I'm like, hey, how about he, like, let's do something different. How about he gets involved with Mae Young? I'm like, what? Like, yeah, he has a like fetish for an old woman. It's like, and then I even remember like saying, we could fuck with the phrase, the blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice, about, liking a black woman. I'd be like, well, he could misinterpret it, be like, oh, the older the berry, the sweeter the juice. And then the Godfather would be like, oh, no, that's, So that took off. And then, and then we're just pitching, like, where do we go from here? And then I said, like, yeah, well, how about she gets pregnant? And like, and then like, I always do this imitation. Vince would like take his glasses off, like that, and like look, and then it'd be like freeze frame, and like, well, am I going to get yelled at, or is he going to be like that? That's great. Yeah, that's great. So then that was such a funny moment because we knew even with the director, be like, oh, when she says I'm pregnant, like let's just like cut around, if we could just get because sometimes you set up like, get extra cameras out there, just getting people's like disgusted expressions.
Yeah.
And then I just remember that was like, and it was like, I'm pregnant, and just like, and he's all happy, and just like, so that was insane. Then here, the weird thing is, so I'm the one who delivered the infamous hand baby, if you know about, that.
Yes.
And that was like, that was odd because, so this thing keeps going logically, and then they're like, what do we do with it? And I never knew who had Vince's ear about other stuff, but sometimes people would look at me like, I was like, well, I just pitch stuff, man, and he goes for it, and that's it. You know what I mean? So I remember he's like, well, the pregnancy's got to end, and I just thought like, well, logical thing is like the Dudleys threw her through the table or in a chair once, and I'm like, well, let's Dudley's, they should fuck her up and she should have a miscarriage and, go to the hospital and talk about heat. And then we can turn a fucking gaga goofy angle into real heat. And they could go on and, be like, oh, this is fucking incredible. It'll be fucking amazing. And Vince like, no, he just goes, nope. She's going to have an obstruction and you're going to deliver it. And I'm like, what? And he just, for whatever reason, that's one of those things where he wanted it over. I don't know. And I kind of, that was one of the few times I'm like, can I talk you into the other thing? I think there's some legs for that. I think that's great heat. I think that's huge. A miscarriage. He's at the hospital. Mark Henry could just become besides himself. You could, you know what I mean? He doesn't have to have victories because he's so fucking hot, about this. And all this tried and true shit, and like, no. Yep. And then he's like, okay, well, you have a miscarriage. And he's like, you're going to be the doctor. And you're going to be like in one of those coats. And I'm like, fuck, I'm like, can't you make me an EMT that's a little more believable, than like, and he's like, all right. And then everyone's like, an obstruction. What is he fucking talking about? And then Vince went to the Magic Man and he found that rubber hand and he came running back. I got it. It's going to be this. This is what you're going to deliver. And we're going to have that, stretchy gimmick noise and put some of that goop on it. So, okay. So that's what happened. And everyone like fucking looks at me like, what the fuck are you pitching? Who's the fucking comedy weirdo pitching that? And I'm like, that was his fucking way out of it. He didn't want it anymore. And I kind of half were like, am I being punished? As in, wrestling.
Right, yeah.
Like, I don't know. And then, so I was the EMT that delivered that. So that was fucking crazy. But yeah, that probably might have been, the craziest, but most things were just great. A lot of time, a lot of saying or a lot of help pitching the APA. I always thought like my philosophy was always like, if you're not going for a title, you should be involved in a feud or something, that would have impact. But I always thought it'd be funny to be like guys that were such badasses that didn't care about any loyalty to anything other than money, and they could get involved in shit for money, just like fucking headhunters, and they fit it perfectly. And that was a good run with them, and got a lot of like good stuff out of that. And I guess the other thing I really liked too was I came up with the 24/7 hardcore title based on Crash Holly being like, you know what, if and just kind of differentiating the titles, because sometimes I feel now it's like we got a red title and a blue title and a universal title. Like what are they all like? Well, one's on one show. I don't know. Whereas the hardcore title had a different impact, and to punch it up, I just thought it was so funny to be like, let's have this guy say, all you need is a referee with you 24/7. It's on the line. And that just opened up a whole world, and I thought like, oh, that was fun. And especially with Crash, he was like perfect for it. And I like Bob Holly, like that dynamic. I always like the dynamic of a tag team that, especially if they're related, like fuck, they could be on top, but internal strife always fucks them up. And you can keep them hot, and they can lose. Really, a big thing is like, how can people lose and still stay hot and not just go new? That's like a big thing. That's the fun stuff, the brain teaser stuff about wrestling that I enjoyed so much. And even like you talked before about pressure, I'd be like, I just kind of put blinders on and just tried to like follow stuff logically and come up with shit like that. And really all the tried true wrestling things that I liked, and character development and all that kind of shit, and just dove in that and kind of was like, had a journeyman attitude about it, as opposed to like, fuck, now I'm the booker and I've got to, have that. Because I think, and I don't know if this is true or not, and I should, but like maybe that was a thing that helped launch Russo, but maybe it was a burden too at some point to be in that game. But he has the personality for that, and he want, and God bless him for all that. I didn't really kind of want that or have that. So there's a real differentiation between saying I'm the guy that took over for Russo, even though in some ways it was true, and then in some ways it's not. If that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. It just felt like that era was like, it's like you said, there was so much going on. There was so much shows. It was like, okay, WWF is so hot. Let's add SmackDown. Let's add Sunday Night Heat. Oh, but then we have the pay-per-views and we have Raws. I mean, there's just so much stuff going on, and obviously to like the Crash Holly stuff is great. Like, how can you make it different and interesting, and keep people going? And hey, let's film at the Jungle Gym. And like,
Yeah.
it just seemed like there was just pure craziness at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And even and my podcast going over stuff, sometimes it's so funny because people will say like, oh, there's no clean finishes here, or there's a lot of schmazes and and run-ins. But I'm always saying like, yeah, you got to remember, maybe that was the beginning of that shit that got stale years later, relying on run-ins and schmazes and stuff. But like, then it was like the shows were hot and it's perfectly understandable. Or even like things like, oh, I remember the first triple threat and doing, things, but you're just trying to like, be different all the time. And then sometimes there's diminishing returns to that, certainly. But yeah, it was, anything went too. It was from I'll tell you this was the craziest, and you could never do it. It was so funny. So in the middle of it, Vince also goes like, I'm starting the XFL.
Yeah.
Like, like, what? Are you fucking kidding me? People are just getting used to that SmackDowns, in the schedule. You're starting the XFL and all this stuff. And then and then they bought a casino in Vegas, and they had the downtown New York club and stuff.
Yep.
So it's the Debbie Reynolds Casino, right? And they had a model of like the WWF casino, like in the Stanford offices, and this it never came to fruition, but it was possibly happening. So I was like up there and I saw it and stuff, and then like, yeah, they're gonna blow up the old casino, the Debbie Reynolds Casino, demolition to build the new one. And I said, oh, we should do. It's just like, I was like, somehow, and if you could just like keep it quiet or whatever, you got to have a thing where fucking Austin blows up your casino. And Vince was like, oh, he was like, so like, oh, we got to do that. And then, so like, just kind of starting. And it's funny because there was some people up there to be, and I can't remember what it was, like CFO, or people would be like, oh, what are you fucking putting in his, mind? It's like, hey, that's my job to fucking do something like that. And right. It never got to a point, because obviously you'd need to block things off. But I was like, oh, there's a way we could do it, because just because now it's tough with social media and everything. But then you could have been like, even if some people knew, it'd be like, if you're just a few blocks away, we could get in a different hotel. And the time they were, when they do those things, they time them, and you could be like, oh, if we got a shot from there, you could be like, oh, there's my casino, I've done it. And fucking Austin blows up. I mean, that's powerfully ridiculous. But it was like, well, maybe that'd be the most ridiculous moment in wrestling history. But it never happened. But so. It was always
would have been awesome though. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, it would have been fucking incredible.
And believable with Austin. He was ruining everything else for Vince.
Yeah. And I would always kind of pitch things to him like cinematically, like, can you imagine your face looking at the window and it's crumbling and you turn and Austin, and just like shit. Like, would have been like, wow. But
yeah, I love that.
Sure. And they were blowing up ambulances and fucking shit. And remember Vince, that one when he rammed the limo, and it was crazy reliving and like watching the whole podcast. It was like, oh, did you have a stunt driver? Like, nope, fucking Vince just got in the limo. And everyone's like, is he going to hurt himself? Maybe. It's just like, there was just so much shit like that. That was like, whew, stuff you couldn't do today. Or even Austin getting hit by a car, and how that angle came out of just nowhere, because that was in my hometown of Detroit. And, so we got like news a couple days before, like, oh, Austin can't go to the pay-per-view. It was a Survivor Series in Detroit. I believe it was Survivor Series. And said his neck's hurt, It's like, oh boy. So what do we do? And then we like met, and this is also like to kind of tell you how the machine worked. I can't even remember who came up with it. And to me, it's not important. It may have been me, it may have been someone else. Someone's like, he should get hit by a car. Okay, he's going to get hit by a car. He's coming in, he gets hit by a car. And then like, that's, oh, who hit Austin? And that becomes the theme of the show. So, like I could just say like, yeah, I came up with that, but like, it doesn't matter. It's kind of like, there's a problem. It's kind of an obvious choice or something to do. And then it becomes, how do you do it? How do you work it? And then just even, the great thing is I used to work at that arena as a kid, like in high school, like running hot dog buns to the concessions or selling peanuts for things in Cobo Arena and Joe Louis right next to each other. And I'm like, oh, right, by the river, there's this road. And then they were doing construction and there was a chain link fence. And then there was the power of wrestling at the time. It was like, oh no, this is good. Like, can we tear all this chain link fence down? And like, sure, because these arenas had such multi-decade relationships with WWF, WWE, and they had fat money. It's like, yeah, we'll do whatever you want. I mean, in an hour, fence was gone. Shit like that. Awesome. It was just like amazing. Yeah. And then a guy, I don't even, it's kind of like you just order shit and it shows up. It's kind of like you go to the office there and then like, oh, some guy came in. He's like shaving his like head, and I think they were putting a fake goatee on him or something because he didn't have one. And it was kind of like, and he was a stunt guy, and he's like, okay, can it come through here? And you get like hit by the car here. And he's like, well, there's no crash pad, or how are we going to do this? And I don't know. And then I remember saying like, well, if you don't do it, because it had to be done, this was day of, you'd get the tape and take the truck. And it wasn't live, but it was live to tape and then presented as live. And then I said, if you don't do it, I'm gonna get a sweatshirt on and put some padding in it. Hell, I'll do it. And Vince goes, oh, and you'll do it. And I'm like, well, fuck, I was joking. But the guy did it, and just remember that being like, the cameras, they like they kind of irised it down so it looked a little dark, and it was all one shot, and it just and you're kind of on pins and needles, like, holy shit, it was long enough where like, and then Austin was here, so it's like, oh my god, chaos, like everything. And then they went to Austin's been hit, like perfect, like one time deal, and you're just like, you're kind of like sweating bullets, kind of like, oh fuck, this is it, and like, we got to do it, and then did it, and then like get it to the truck, and then whole thing gets pulled off like perfectly, and it's like, wow. And then that night you're like, well, then the next show it actually made the show great because there was a running theme, like, who hit Austin? And that just came out. That was just a problem fixer. You know what I mean? And then later it's funny, the next night, who hit Austin, this growing thing. And then wrestlers are coming to me pitching why they should be the one to hit Austin. And then years later, like, oh, the who hit Austin gimmick, how did that? And then you're just like, that was just a fucking problem solving thing on the fly. And that's also something that I don't think would have been received well today with social media. That would have immediately been out like, oh, Austin hurt his neck, and the thing they came up with was this on the fly, and it would have been all judged and spread out there. And where there was still at that time where there was dirt sheets and smart marks, like the small 10% of it leading it, but for the most part there was still that excitement if you could pull that shit off. So, and that's shit too that I liked about working in that era now, that I think is like probably kind of difficult, if you will. And frankly, when you see those crowds are so hot, this isn't trying to be a old asshole or anything, but it's just the nature of it, the business. The cell phone has made the crowds less hot, because just 20% of people are like, oh, I got to film this or look at it.
Yes.
When you really look at those shows, and I'm not making a determination of like, well, the old days or anything like that, but
we're living in the moment.
They're engaged. They're just so much more engaged, and that's just the nature of it. You watch some of these like Crown Jewels shows, and it's just like, holy shit, there's fucking Shawn Michaels and the Undertaker in that front row's like, on their phone, and it's like, wow.
Yep.
But
it's just the way it is nowadays. Yeah. And you mentioned with the Austin thing, him getting hurt too. I mean, that throws a monkey wrench into the writers. He's the top guy. You know what I mean? Like then now we have to go in this direction. It's crazy being a writer.
You know what? What's odd about that sometimes is someone getting hurt. At least there's something, and I point to that one exactly. There's something that's happening that you then follow the logic line. You know what I mean? And also a thing that is never put into it a lot. Guys, the absence of guys sometimes helps. It sucks when the guy's coming up and he's hurt and then he's just out. But if it's like someone as big as the Undertaker, when he got hurt and he came back, you always have like an ace in the hole. It's like, well, when he comes back, or even when then guys would kind of gain heat by jumping from one to the other. It kind of like made them like, oh, it made them bigger, back in the day when everyone was, and one of the greatest entrances ever was like Jericho going from WCW, then the Y2J countdown was just incredible. And then when he came out, you could see like, I don't know how many people knew who he was, but it didn't matter, because if like the audience would be like, oh, who's this guy? And then they'd be like, that's Jericho, I know him, who is he? They would know, and it just gained that momentum. So as Vince said, like if real stuff happened and you could incorporate it in, it was kind of awesome, because it was like, it was a definitive thing that wasn't a thing that was pitched to be judged or shot down. You know what I mean? Because that was the hardest part of the business sometimes, to be writing a show with Gewurz. Okay, so we got all these different angles, and let's wait and see. And like, no, god damn it, like, okay, how about what I mean? You're following like a mercurial guy. It's one guy that in some ways is good, but sometimes sucks, because he's being like, oh shit, he's gonna hate everything until the end and rip it up to be just chaotic, and then you'll have to, what I mean? So that was the most difficult, so I would just handle it by being like, oh, this seems like a pretty good show, we've got to write 2 more when that one fucking goes away. And that
please
could be
don't
fatiguing.
throw this one out. Yeah,
and you can't, so in the way sometimes you can't stick to anything too hard, because you just can't.
Is that the worst thing about working for him, though, that he would be so like, I hate it, like, no, start over kind of thing? Like, is that the worst part?
Yeah, I would say that's it. That that kind of like, and frankly, there was like times you could be like, but I'm used to that, even when showrunners and TV shows and stuff. Sometimes you'd be like, hey, how about, we pitch the, the guy throws the red ball through the green window. Oh, that's ridiculous. And then, okay, how about the blue ball through the yellow window? And then later you just change your inflection. Oh, how about the red ball through the green window? All right.
Right.
Same thing. And so, so the stuff like that can be, fatiguing. And, occasionally when, like when I came up, when I said the Mae Young hand thing, like that was a little odd. And it didn't take your spirit away, because you just always knew like the fucking business is crazy and there's the next thing. And sometimes it's one-stop shopping. So it's good to have one fucking tyrannical person. And at least that tyrannical person works as hard as other tyrannical persons. It's horrible when you work for someone who's like, doesn't work as hard, or is like, whatever.
Right.
But, at the same time, that did suck, where it's like, no, this is let's follow it to its logical thing. Let's have her have a miscarriage and get heat and do this, all the things that I'm learned about wrestling, and no, it's this weird thing, and like, that's odd. Okay. So sometimes you get too many of those. And what the other most difficult thing is, man, there's not enough real estate for everyone. So sometimes, even though you'd pull shit off, sometimes you'd at the end of a show, like I remember Chaz from like the Headbangers, like another guy, Glenn, was hurt, and everyone liked him and how he worked, but it was like you'd come out of a show and he'd be there kind of waiting to like try to talk to Vince, or like he had like one kind of wife beater gimmick or something that someone came up with, and then it fizzled away. And so you got good guys that are put in weird positions where you're like, fuck, I don't know, I can't bring anything to Vince now. We got so much shit going on with this. So sometimes you're bummed to be like, you just rock in a hard place with like, fuck, I wish there was, ways to get everyone over on things. And some things would get sour for whatever reason, or not ever, just like they go away, and there's a lot of that. And some of it's understandable just because there's not enough time and it's so crazy. But that would suck, because you'd be like, oh, fuck, that guy's a good worker. Everyone speaks highly of him. And this, this kind of doesn't fit or whatever. Or sometimes even, guys have had like gimmick changes that kind of hurt them too. Like, what's your name? You're this or you're that, like,
Yep.
So there's, certain things like that. And that's just part of that's just the business too. Even if it's not, there's an unfairness to and fickleness to just the nature of the business, period, at times with people. And that's tough. But sometimes when it gets put into like, when you're you're kind of in this position where like, you got Vince's ear, you could do this. Like, yes and no, sometimes it's like that. And sometimes it's just not, and, that's that.
Unpredictable, Vince. Very unpredictable.
Yeah, very, very much so, and oddly predictable in some ways, like, you're not going to go for that. There was a certain, kind of things, but yeah, mercurial would be a good word, but yeah. And you know what? And I got, honestly, I think I got the good version in that era I worked, just because everything was just going so well and it was just growing and the numbers were so big that there was always a fuel. And that's why sometimes it would hurt for people to be like, oh shit, they wanted so bad to be a part of this fucking thing that was just, every time we'd come back and what are the ratings, and like, holy fuck, they're through the roof.
Yep.
They're through the roof. And also what I loved about that time was, which is different now it's odd because there's these overall deals, but you're still like, how many people are watching? I don't know, but they're making money because they got this big overall deal. And then they got this big Netflix deal. But you know what I mean? When I was there was a direct line to what are the cable ratings? They're fucking huge. Therefore, you're charging more money. You're making more money in advertising. There's a pay-per-view. What's the pay-per-view rate? 35 million buy rate. Huge. There was a direct correlation to success, like you're in a sports team, you're like, there's a score and and then things get murky now where even when they made the network, it was kind of like, well, now everyone has the network. So pay-per-views are free. What is a pay-per-view? And I think, do they have a new 3-letter thing called it like a top view?
Premium live event.
Yeah. A PLE, which is like, okay, that didn't come about naturally. Pay-per-view did. And you know what I mean? So things like that are kind of like, well, that's a little murky. There was just something great about that dynamic of like, like even movies back in the day, what's the box office? It failed. Oh my God, it's huge. It's a hit. Now, is it a hit? Well, we say it is, and it's just everything's confusing because they don't want to say how many people aren't really watching, and it's on, Fox. So the money's coming in, but you know what I mean? It's not all, so it's all murky kind of, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's weird to say. I know the social media numbers are through the roof, but what are the actual numbers for the show? Yeah, and obviously they're doing huge business and they're making huge money, but it's always like back then it was like, okay, Austin is the draw. Like this is why he's a draw. He sold 25 million T-shirts, and if the pay-per-view did 500,000 buys because he wrestled Undertaker, like it was a lot easier to kind of pinpoint.
Yeah, exactly. And now they, even with like, oh, there's an overall TV deal, which is huge money, but at the same time, and like TV's like this a lot, like late night TV and whatever, you might be like, oh, but no one's really watching. Who really watches? What are the numbers? Well, we don't want to talk about the numbers because now it's disseminated into social media and people watching on YouTube, so there's all this murkiness and they can cover their ass. So, no one ever says anything's an abject failure. You know what I mean? But at the same time, oh, it'll come up when the TV deal comes up and the contract comes up. Then the other side will be like, oh, no one's watching when they really price. And then, but then the Netflix thing is huge. But then it's like TKO, this overall, company. And I know people at Netflix now are kind of like, well, now we're pissed because there's no money for other shows because they've spent all this money on this and they're going to turn it into a live thing. But there's still diciness as to how's that going to work. And like you said, they're certainly making money and they have made money, but it's just it's a different, I always enjoyed that. Like, oh, what are the numbers? It's like a live gate, you can't beat that. That fucking, how many, oh, it's packed, here's the numbers.
And you almost had to go pedal to the metal, like we got to make the next show hot. Now they're almost like, well, we got so much money up front. Let's just take it easy and we'll plan out the storyline slower. But back then, it's like, no, we got to do Austin versus Kane on TV for the title tonight. You know what I mean? Like it was a lot more pressure.
And there's advantages and disadvantages to both. There's an advantage to being able to like long-term thing, but at the same time, like the juice isn't there a little bit. And in fact, in my opinion, it's just human nature. The Monday Night Wars, as they call it, just fueled each other. Once the WWF at the time, or it was E at the time, won, so to speak, and once they subsumed and bought WCW, it was almost like at that very moment, they just took the foot off the gas a little.
Oh, big
You
time.
know,
Yep.
and that's just human nature of like, you know, and for me, and some things that I talk to people there or even consulted after, I'd be like, oh, you know, Shane should like run WCW, you know, and they should, but you should do it right, where you do kind of run them separately and have like a big long plan and have them at a WrestleMania in 3 years from now. But of course, Vince controlled too much of it, and then with ECW, then in my opinion, it became, you know, what's the difference between ECW, SmackDown, and Raw? Like, Raw's red, ECW is red, and SmackDown's blue.
Yep.
You know what I mean? That was, and there was just not that competition never smelled right to me. The battle of the brands, it always kind of like, yeah, sure, there's a different belt, but not really.
Yeah, super weak for sure. So as we head towards the finish, we hit the wind down here. What is next for you? What do you got coming up down the pike?
I am doing that wrestling podcast, and like I said, I'm writing stuff, working on some cartoons, and as usual, I'm pitching things, and I'm in that. You know, that's the other thing when you work that Conan or wrestling. It's like, oh, it's on, and then you go out and you work on other things, and you're like, oh, I'm doing pretty good. I got like 4 or 5 things going. And it's, you know, the entertainment business is like baseball. It's a, if you can bat, I can bat 260. That'd be incredible.
Right.
You know, because most things die, and even things that, you know, people like die and whatever. So I'm doing like voiceovers, and hopefully there'll be a couple cartoon things that, you know, I don't want to put the mojo on them, and because they're not at any point where like it's going to be on, you know, or anything like that. But and especially the businesses post pandemic and everything, it's kind of like it's shrunk and what have you. But I'm super fortunate to be, you know, things are loosening up a little, and hopefully in the next year or two, some things will come out there with my name on them. So, and
more tales from the Attitude Era, hopefully.
More tales from the Attitude Era, which has been super interesting for me personally. I don't know how many people think like to see my therapy. I should film it like on a couch, like, oh my goodness, this happened. You know, Brian Gewirtz, he's going to be on one time. He's a longtime writer. I always viewed myself through the years as his wrestling therapist, because he'd always call up and threaten to leave, but he did that for about 20 years.
Right, yeah.
So he's seen the whole, you know, transformation, and now he works for the Rock's company in straight more of like TV production. But yeah, what a business, huh? But I enjoy your stuff too, because it's the old era, and you know, talking to Arn Anderson, and it was one of my absolutely, even though he's quite huge, one of the most underrated of all time wrestlers, I think.
Totally agree.
Whenever I still watch matches where you're like, he's still figuring out new fucking ways to sell, you know, and dynamic things. And that's what I'd always tell people. Like, if you could be like these fucking guys, if you're entertaining, selling, then you always get your shit in. You know, the thing of a wrestler is, I got to get my shit in. It's like, just sell, be incredible at selling. Then you even piss off other people who are on the offensive. Like, what the fuck? You're getting over better by selling, you know, and just some of the shit he did, and it was always like fresh, and like, you know, it was like, you know, it's always something. Yeah, he's incredible. So
I love him. One of the best. I love him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So where can everybody find you and follow you social media wise?
Tales from the Attitude Era, TFTAE. Just Google that. We got TikTok, we got Gmail, YouTube, and everything like that. That's the best way. And then my Instagram is at Curtis the Dog, KURTISTHEDOG. And that's it.
All right. Tommy, thank you so much for all the time tonight. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah, you're a fellow Polak, huh?
Yes. Big time.
Dziękuję bardzo. Yeah. All right, man.